Ave Maria, welcome everyone to the channel. I am Fonzie. I form part of the content team here at the Fatima Center. If you've been following our short World Youth Day series, you'll know by now that the Fatima Center will be sending a group to Lisbon to bring and promote the true message of Fatima to the youth that will be present at World Youth Day. As stated previously, we will not be participating. In fact, we will be bringing tools to equip those with the true message of Fatima, such as this bookmark, which contains one of the Fatima prayers in multiple languages, and this brochure, which will also be available in multiple languages. With these tools, we hope to inspire the youth to come to fully know, understand, and obey the true message of Fatima. You can definitely grab some of these items at the link in the description, and all of our World Youth Day things at fatima.org/WYD 2023. So for today's interview, we have a very interesting and awesome woman. So awesome, in fact, that I asked her to marry me, Kalena Pedroza. Today she's going to tell us about her experience at World Youth Day, how that impacted her faith, and what she as a young parent thinks of the youth going to World Youth Day. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. It's an honor, especially considering, So let's start off telling everyone a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Kalena Pedroza. I'm 37 years old and I have 5 children, 4 living. I'm a domestic engineer and I like to sew and freestyle.
So domestic engineer, what exactly is that?
It just makes sure that the house runs smoothly. So just like engineering, you'd put something together to make sure that it connects well, is the same thing, just domestic style at the house. The same way you'd run a domestic church, essentially.
Yeah, I'd say you do that rather well.
Thank you. By the grace of God.
Amen. So you went to one of the World Youth Days, right?
Yes. 2005 in Cologne, Germany.
2005. I believe that's when Benedict became Pope that year?
Correct, yes. That was his first World Youth Day.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure today's World Youth Day would probably be like night and day between each other. I guess we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah. So how would you describe World Youth Day to, let's say, your average Catholic?
Okay, so someone that's never been to World Youth Day, it's really a gathering of youth, of the young people, right? And anyone in the church, not necessarily the youth, but it is focused and targeted towards the youth, just to kind of gauge them. And from what I gathered from my experience was to introduce them into the entire world of Catholicism, because it's not just the Western church that goes there, it's everyone. And that's kind of what I was most excited about. I didn't know about World Youth Day prior to the event. My mom had once got a CD from, the songs that were there, and she told me, but it wasn't something that I quite remembered from that, just having one CD. But then when they told me about what it was, about this gathering and going, and the Pope would be there, and there's going to be mass. And so I was quite interested to see what it was about. At that time, I was still searching for my faith, so there wasn't like this great depth to what was happening. I just knew that I wanted to see what faith looked like for everyone else in the world.
And speaking of where you were in your faith, how would you describe your faith at that time when you went?
So the faith wasn't something that was necessarily present in my house the entire time. My grandma had the faith. My grandma was one of the ones that talked about it the most. But then when we left, I left in 5th grade, we moved, and that's when my mom really got into the church and started taking us and made sure that we were there every single Sunday. She was kind of the backbone for the faith in our household then at that time. And still there was a lot of learning that was left to be done. She didn't know everything. She was poorly catechized, unfortunately at that time, because of the changes in the church, a lot of people were poorly catechized. But she did the best that she could, and she was always trying to get us to be involved in the church. A lot of youth group meetings, a lot of different activities for us. And so I had just graduated high school, so she felt like this would be a really good experience for me. And so I was excited. I had made my confirmation with a teacher who was really awesome, and he really did make me question what was the faith in my life, what was I looking for, and how did the faith apply to my life. So that's kind of the mindset that I went into World Youth Day with.
Was this when you were in New Mexico, or was this when you were like in South Texas?
So when we moved in 5th grade, we went from Houston to South Texas. And then right after graduation, we came right back to Houston before we moved to New Mexico. So it was like in the transitional period of my life, which I actually was very excited because I really wanted to do something. And I mean, just graduating high school, I wanted to take a year off and see, what was available to me. So I kind of told my mom that I wouldn't come back from World Youth Day, but that didn't happen, unfortunately, because I thought that Germany was so beautiful. It was great.
So around that time, if I recall from all the conversations we've had, I think you weren't attending the Latin Mass or something. You were practicing Novus Ordo.
So where we were, interestingly enough, when we left, my aunt had a really good friend. Her son had a really good friend whose mom had introduced us to the Latin Mass. And so my mom, she kind of stayed with them. Every time they'd have a youth event or a pilgrimage, she'd make an effort to take us. But because we were in South Texas, there was no Latin Mass available. So we would go to Novus Ordo, which it was a big deal for me, because when I had gone to the Latin Mass with the order that we were following at that time, or that we were with that time, I learned so much about the faith, but I didn't see it in practice in the church. And so it kind of hindered my growth for a long time, because I wanted those same principles that were being taught to us here in this more strict form. I wanted those implemented all across the board, at least for my life. And I was the first one in my confirmation at that time that was veiling. So once we had learned about the Latin Mass and why we should veil, we never entered the church without a veil. And it was even in Novus Ordo, right? So like I said, it was always constant growth in our family because those things had been lost. And then come to find out, my grandparents had actually been married in the Latin Mass. My dad grew up going to the Latin Mass. All of those things that had been lost were slowly being restored in our household.
And so in the midst of that, what led you to attend World Youth Day?
Well, that group that introduced me to Latin Mass, they were actually going, and my mom wanted me to first go with them, which I was willing to go with them, but because we just couldn't afford the cost from that, we had to find another means. So thankfully, as God had designed it, the church that we were attending here in Houston, the priest had said, we're going to take a group to World Youth Day. And it was a Novus Ordo parish, which we were already going to Novus Ordo because we couldn't find the Latin Mass anywhere. So we were just trying to do it as reverent as possible. Any Mass that was reverent, that's where we were kind of going. So when we went to that parish, the priest said, well, I'm going to do fundraisers for scholarships for any child who wants to go but can't afford to go. And so he did that. He did like a 3-course meal thing, and it was a big hit because everyone knew that he liked to cook a lot, which I didn't know, but I was so grateful because it really did help. They paid for everything for my ability to go. That's and amazing. So in hindsight, I know that it was the Blessed Mother that just arranged it, because it really did. That trip had a mixture of everything. So when we went to World Youth Day, there was obviously all the kind of life teen things were going on, concerts and events and what have you. And then there was the churches. We got to tour the different churches at that time. The cathedral actually in Cologne was under construction, but they had the relics of the Magi. So we got to tour around that, and we got to see that. It was beautiful. And then we went to different little museums. So unfortunately, because of the I would say the decay of the church or what have you, a lot of the churches were closing. And I remember going into these, looking at the outside and being like, wow, it's going to be beautiful inside. And then you get inside and there's nothing. It's just completely gutted.
Wow.
And so that was very heartbreaking for me. Especially because, like I said, I was really trying to find the faith. What is Novus Ordo? What is the Latin Mass? Like, where does that meet? Where does that, And so that's kind of where I was at when I went to World Youth Day. So there was a lot of good things, a lot of camaraderie with other Catholics, some in search for the faith, some just trying to have fun, some just trying to make the most of a trip or see the experience. But for me, it was really about, where is my faith? Like, what am I supposed to do? I learned this in this one side, and then I've learned this other thing on this other side. So where does that meet?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, would you say that seeing the empty churches, was that something that you felt like was a tangible external expression of the decay of the church?
Yeah, I felt like, because one of the biggest things for me growing up was when we started following and going to this Latin Mass when it was available to us. One of the biggest things was Jesus Christ is present, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And that was new. That was a new concept for my mom. Because my mom, when she was going to church, they told her it's just a symbol. So he's not there, it's just a symbol.
Interesting.
And so when they told her that, it was like, whoa, I've been teaching people that it's just a symbol, and yet here is Jesus Christ truly present, body, blood, soul, and divinity.
Wow.
So walking away from that and then going into these churches where they're the house of God, where he should be there, truly body, blood, soul, and divinity, and he's not, is just this, whoa, you don't even know what you have, and you don't know what you stripped yourselves of having. Like, you don't even realize that you've not the proper word, I guess, would be displaced God. You've displaced God from his own home, right? So that was very heartbreaking to me. And then there was a museum where they had all of these relics, or antiques as they call them, but they were things that I had seen used in the Latin Mass. So I was even more distraught, because I'm like, okay, now not only have you displaced Jesus from the tabernacle, you've set up everything that could adore him in this museum like it's just nothing. Like it shouldn't be used again, or it's just something to adore now.
It's faded away.
Right. So that was very hard for me. Because I really wanted to know, I wanted to see the faith in people. That's what I wanted to see. Because I felt like had I seen the faith in people the way that we see it in the saints, I would have grown so much more.
And is that something that you took home with you as a means to, like, turn you from, for example, just a laxed, I'll practice the faith whenever I want, to a more serious, like, I feel like I can probably change some things in a personal way, be an impact myself.
I wish I could say that, but I actually came home stagnant. I was really, because there was no proper guiding force that was constant and consistent and that could discipline me, I really wasn't seeing the growth the way that I wanted it to. And it wasn't a growth within me, it was just, I was having real issues finding those people who could help me grow in that sense. So I wasn't surrounding myself necessarily, because I didn't know anyone. All of the people in the group that I had met prior to, they all lived far away, or they all had their own friend groups, and I was just kind of stuck out. So for me, seeing it, I knew what I wanted. I just couldn't grasp it. And because I didn't have the proper surroundings, I just kept letting myself fall back into the world because I had nothing to say. Just stay on this path. And that was very hard for me. I didn't grow up with the discipline to keep myself accountable in that sense.
Right. And so would you credit going to World Youth Day, like opening that up for you as a reality?
Yes.
Seeing, because it's very interesting. I know we've talked about this several times, over the years, but seeing it in this light, just how very real it was, even at the time, in 2005, Summorum Pontificum has not yet come out, right? But you're in the middle of, Novus Ordo, Latin Mass, seeing the huge differences between both,
right?
And then going to World Youth Day, and seeing just churches being closed, in one of the places that, the church was big,
right?
In Germany, Europe, and all that. So would you say going to World Youth Day kind of made that a reality for you, in the sense of, the Latin Mass is a must. I can't see myself, going to Novus Ordo and actually growing in my faith in a more substantial way.
Yes. So it stuck with me, and I really wanted the Latin Mass. I wanted the reverence is what I wanted. I wanted the reverence of what the Latin Mass had to offer and the beauty of it, right? So the choir was phenomenal. So just that angelic, beauty to it. But what I ended up doing several years later after was I actually agreed to go to a come and see because I started to discern the religious life because I wanted that depth to my soul. Like I wanted that conviction in every single thing that I did. So I did do that. I went and I stayed with the nuns, and that was another profound time in my life. But again, I came back into the world and I suffered for it, and unfortunately it took me some time to find it. Once I had a really good confessor and a really good, this is what I'm doing, then I kind of stayed with it more, and it just started growing from there.
So clearly, you discern the will of God for your life. You, despite the fact that you didn't have a consistent and disciplined spiritual direction, it led you to where you are now, right? Now going back to the events at World Youth Day, what exactly happened at some of these events? Did you attend some of them? Was there some sort of like catechesis? Was there, a level of, maybe one-to-one sessions? And I asked that because, I've never been, obviously you know that, but, seeing it throughout the years, through the eyes of a lot of people, you've seen some pictures, where people get to go to confession with the Pope, they get to go to, these one-on-one sessions with, different bishops or prelates or what have you. Was that something that you experienced, or maybe you saw someone experience? What were some of the events that went down?
Yeah, so a lot of the events that I remember there was big invitations and advertising for the local parishes holding holy hours, adoration, holding the mass, what time the mass was. I remember when on the main day when you go into the field, there's confession, there's masses that were being given. So when the Pope was actually giving his mass, the priest that I went with, he was hosting a small mass because you can't hear it. Because when you're at that point, when you're there in the field, there's so many people. There's vendors, there's things, they've packed you lunches, they've got all kinds of stuff, and you're sleeping in this field, right? Which it dropped to like, I don't know, 40 degrees, 30 degrees the day that we were there. So you're freezing, but again, for me, it was like a sacrifice. We'll just do it. It's a pilgrimage. It's an experience. But I know that not everybody felt that way, because some of the people that I was traveling with, the group that I was traveling with, they were just there because they could go, you know, and it was available to, the opportunity was there to go and see another part. And one of the things that we did was we were looking for, there was a church hosting a musical organ concert, and so we wanted to go to the organ concert, me and my friend Rob, and he was one out of the few in the group that was like really wanting to go and see something, experience something Catholic. The rest of them just wanted to hang out at like the local internet shop and, you know, or just tour around and eat things and see things. So
was this on your free time, or was this
on our free time?
Okay.
And as part of the thing? So like when they had an event that was geared towards the pilgrims for World Youth Day, we kind of went together. And then so we'd be like, okay, we're gonna go hit this event together, we're gonna go to this adoration at this time, or we're gonna go to this mass at this time, or Father's gonna offer mass in the hotel at this time. And then everyone meets back here at this time, and then we'll decide where we're going from there. So it was a mixture of things. I guess for the average person going who doesn't have some type of direction that they're looking or seeking anything for themselves.
Yeah, how would that look like?
It would just be like, there's all these events and you have to make a choice, right? So it would just be like the rest of life. You've got to make a choice. Do you want to do something spiritual, or do you want to do something that's just available to you? Yeah,
like, you know, at the natural level, I feel like, you know, some of these interviews, you know, they touch on that, where some of the events, like, it just pertains to the natural.
Right.
You know, you have these rock bands, you have these music, you know, you have these Congo lines that we've seen some of the, you know, John Venari mentioned it, you know, it's stuff like that. It seems like it's like purely natural. But then you have the supernatural, which almost seems like it's a second, what would you say, like, you know, just in case, you know.
Oh yeah.
You know, just in case some people need that, like
another
it's here.
Option. Right?
Yeah, like it's an option. Yeah. Like, oh, it's optional. You know, the supernatural is optional, but it seems like the pure focus seems like it's only natural, right?
I mean, it's hard to say, because when you're going into the city is preparing for just tourists. So they're gonna offer you all kinds of things. They're gonna throw things that are just pure tourism, right? Essentially. So it really is dependent on the group that you're going with, and whoever the spiritual head of that group is, or director, what have you. If they want to focus on it being a pilgrimage, or if it's going to be like a tourist attraction, essentially. Thankfully, I had a priest who wanted us to really focus on a pilgrimage, even though he didn't enforce it per se. But we did get to experience a lot more on the pilgrimage side that I was looking forward to. And then, of course, you know, you have people that they're just trying to sneak out of the hotel and go hang out and, you know, and do what they want to do. And so it was interesting. One thing I will say is, even with that group, I was able to make friends that long time after was still trying to like encourage them to grow in their Catholicism. And so I could say, yeah, I was. Okay. So years after, I remained friends with several of them. Some stayed within the church, and others kind of just, you know, just fell away. It just dwindled down. And so if you were going and you didn't have or know anything, it's easy to get caught up in, I'll just go to this event because it's available. And then there's this other thing, or there's this really cool pizza restaurant, or there's this, you know, tourism that. So it's just dependent on the person, honestly. It's not like there's a pool, or there's or that they're trying to send you or lead you in some type of direction. But it was really cool. The really cool thing was, even when you're like outside eating at the pizza place, you'd see like this entire line of Franciscans walking by, and you're like, whoa, what's happening? Right? So I got to see a lot of the people that I knew, that I had met in my youth programs in South Texas, I got to see them at World Youth Day, and they lived like in New York.
Wow.
And I got to see them like just walking down the street, and I was like, what? Like, hey, it's so cool that you're here, you know? So that was cool. It kind of reconnected for me all the dots of things that I had already experienced.
That's awesome. So now that you are where you are in your faith, you know, what would you suggest to, let's say, you know, our children, or say a family member, or, you know, a friend from your parish that their child wants to go to World Youth Day? You know, what would be some of your suggestions?
I mean, it's definitely something that I would like my children to experience, even though they're, even though the mindset is different. So in other words, because Novus Ordo is on such a large scale there, I would still like my children to go, to see, experience. I mean, it's inevitable that the children take a look at the raw reality of what the church has become. Obviously, I pray a lot for them in their spiritual journeys. I think that's something that's important. But we can't, I guess in my perspective, having grown the way that I grew up without it, I still see the charity in trying to move other people, essentially. So I guess the best way to describe it would be, as I recently heard a Franciscan minister talk about, you know, you go into these places where they don't have the faith, where they do live in sin, like places like New Guinea, where they they were a mission. They were on the mission to bring the Latin Mass to the people of New Guinea. And so you're going into this craziness that's, you know, that's full of heathens and whatever you want to call them, cannibals, whatever, whoever they are, right? And you're still taking that faith into that ground. And it's a hard place to be, because obviously these are Franciscans. They're not just coming from out of nowhere. They're coming from families. So imagine if your child goes off and they join, you know, the religious life, and they call you and they're like, hey, I got to go into this remote part of the world, into these places where they don't like Catholics, or they may not appreciate Catholics. And then you're scared. You're like, whoa, that's not a good idea. I don't think I want you going there, you know, because our tendency on a natural level is to just stay, to just remain. It's easier to be at peace than it is to disrupt, or to go out and see if you can take that charity and drive that into some other place, you know, some dark corner of the world, essentially. So for my children to go into that place and bring that faith, obviously I really want to set the foundation first, and that's what we're doing. You know, that's part of the domestic engineering of the church. You know, like here in our house, we're giving our children that ground, that foundation of the domestic church. And then what do they do with it? You know, because every day our children, when they're out in the world, they have to give that somewhere. Like it has to lead them to something, whether it's being charitable by just saying thank you and you're welcome, or whether it's just these little graces of God, right? Whether it's just dealing with someone who's elderly or younger or what have you, like all of that in turn is really what the church is, right? So anything that's good, it comes from Catholicism, and that's just all together, you know. So yeah, I want my children to experience that if that's what they want. If they want to go into the religious life, I want that too. I want for them whatever God wants for them. And I feel like, and I've always walked out of the door saying this, because my mom would always say, oh, don't go there, or don't do this or do that, you know, and we have that tendency to be protective, and I get that. But when I was 18, it was like, I have to make these steps, you know, I have to do these things. So I always told my mom when I was 18, whenever I would leave, and she would be like, okay, just make sure you're back at this time, or do this or that. And I'm like, okay. She'd always say, don't get in trouble, or don't get hurt, or don't do, you know, because you want that. But I would always tell her, whatever God wants, right? Whatever, because in my mind, I had gotten to this point, learning from the Latin Mass, that everything boils down to God's will. So I'd be like, look, Mom, if I'm going to get robbed, I'm going to get robbed whether I'm at home, sitting in front of the TV, or whether I'm out somewhere. whatever God has decided, that's what's going to ultimately happen. And that was always my mindset going into everything. And so that's where I'm comfortable at. That's my life now. You know, whatever God is deciding, it's going to happen regardless of whether I pay into it or not. So I would rather go knowing that I have a faith, that God is in charge, and that nothing other than God's will is going to happen to me. And so that's the same thing I'm giving my children.
So based off of what you said, it sounds like you want your children to go as missionaries. Does that sound right? Or is there like, is it an and or is it both? Or
I guess it would be both. I would like my children to always have that mindset of saving a soul, right? So that's something that's always important in the forefront of my mind. I mean, we are the missionaries of the church. So, but I think it's more so, I want them to go with the open mind that they may be a missionary to someone else, or they may be someone else's, someone else may find them and shine some light or ignite some type of fire under them. But I want it to be with the right mindset. So there's always going to be things that, like for me, I guess growing up as a teenager, I clashed a lot with my parents, right? So going into somewhere that was unknown, new, and without them, it was like, what is faith? Like, really, what is it besides what is being told to me, what is being talked about in the household, what is being, I guess, driven into my mind? Like, what is faith for me? What does that look like? What is that? How can that grow? What can that become? I went into it looking for that. I went into it with that mindset, and now I think it's a mixture of everything, because some of the people that were there, even if they weren't a positive role to me, they played in on how I wanted my life to look. So in other words, it was like, unfortunately, it was like, well, maybe that's not what I think Catholicism is, or maybe that's not how I want my Catholicism to be, or my faith to be. I don't want it to look like that. And then there's, on the other side, there was, like I said, there was Franciscans, and there was, all of these religious. And so it was like, that's kind of where I want it to be. Like, I want to go in that direction. I want that deep faith. Like, I want to be at the point where I can abandon everything for the love of God, essentially. And so that's kind of where I was at. So it's dependent on the person, and it's dependent on, for me, it was go and find out. Go and go find me is really what God said. Go and go find me. And so that would be my thing with sending my children. Go and go find me, and then pray that someone is there to grab them, grasp that, and say, hey, this is what faith looks like, right? So pray that they find a missionary there, if they are not the missionary themselves, that someone can just lead them into, because like I said, for me, I was already on a search, and keeping in touch with some of the people that I went with, then I became the missionary without trying to. So I went as a participant and came out a missionary. And I didn't try to do that. That wasn't my goal, But the more that I grew, the more that I wanted to share that with other people. And I specifically wanted to share it with the people that had gone with me, because they knew a lot of the events that we attended. When we did get to attend group events, it was like, kind of like, didn't you get that? Like, didn't you try that? Didn't you taste it? Don't you know how good God is? Like, it was trying to bring back that memory for them, and trying to reignite that flame of like, you went, you saw, like, believe it, So it's a mixture of both, really. I want my kids to go because I want them to experience that life, just seeing outside of a bubble.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Because I mean, we talk about it all the time. Especially here, Americans here in the States, they don't get any experience outside of their own bubble. Some of them don't even go outside of their city.
Right.
They have no sense of like, social mannerisms outside of their, zip code.
Right.
Outside of their, and so, you having traveled, gave you that experience to, see people in a different way, see different cultures in a different way, Catholicism in a different way on the other side of the world. Right. Now, speaking of missionaries, a lot of that sounds like what the Fatima Center is exactly doing. Is sending essentially missionaries out there, to promote the full message of Our Lady of Fatima, right? Now, at that time, would you say you were familiar with the message, or was that something that, you still hadn't heard of about?
So it was mentioned in our household. Like my grandma had mentioned it. Her parents were really big in the faith. And so I knew of Fatima. I didn't know the story, or I didn't know what was the I didn't know the depth to it, like how important it was and what it was. We weren't praying a rosary every day, It wasn't until I was about maybe 13 or 14, we were introduced to that Latin mass group, and they were driving like pray the rosary daily, and go to mass as much as you can and do all these things. But it wasn't on Fatima. It was just do it because it's the good. That's what I remember. That's what I can recall. But I had heard the message of Fatima during one of those missions with them. And so it was going there and being fed that message of this is what Fatima is. Because I remember distinctively when I was probably about 9 or 10, something about on the 13th day, and that I could remember that. But it wasn't anything that stuck to me. That wasn't, because it was now knowing the message about going on every first Saturday and first Friday, and and trying to live out the message of Fatima and praying the rosary daily. It's something that I remember the Latin mass group saying, hey, because they used to have overnight adorations with the family. So you'd go as a family unit, and you'd start on the first Friday, and then you'd stay until the first Saturday. And so that was the first introduction of what the message was, without knowing that it was from Fatima. And it wasn't until later in growing that I was like, where is this from? And once I found out, oh, this is from Our Lady of Fatima, and she said this, and then I was like, we have the cure-all and we don't even use it? Like, you mean to tell me, like, we don't even have to be in this position that we're in, and yet here we are, So it is something that's very important, something that I, find myself telling people, well, do you go to First Friday? Do you go to First Saturday? I remember a story that I was reading. It was about a Japanese commander, and he told a Catholic, he said, you guys have the recipe to fix the world, and yet you don't do it, right? So your lady, she's the one that told you that you can do these things and you can give peace to the world, and yet you don't do it. And that's how I feel, and that's how I felt at that time, going to Novus Ordo, but learning these other things and learning in depth here, but kind of missing it here. And so I felt like we have the answers. I know we have the answers because I've seen them. Like I've heard them, I've seen them put into practice. I've learned these, but yet it's not practiced here. So how do we connect those? How do you bring that together?
So going back to World Youth Day, would you say if someone from the Fatima Center was there and they handed you, a booklet, a pamphlet, what have you, on the true message of Our Lady of Fatima, do you believe that would be something that would have been beneficial in impacting you even more so on another level?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think it would have been helpful because it would have been in my face. It could have reconfirmed a lot of things for me. It would have been something that that I was interested in reading, because one of the things is that I do recall is you do get a lot of papers. Like you get a lot of brochures, pamphlets, handouts, things like that. But I can't recall a single one being on the prayer life or being on something that pertained to the mass, other than just saying like, oh, here's this pamphlet, this is when the local churches are having this and that, or here's this pamphlet and it's for this place down here, there's a concert here, or something
like we were saying, just everything on a natural level.
Right, exactly, everything. And a lot of it was was just because it was stamped with the
World
emblem
Youth Day
World
logo.
Youth Day, and so you were just getting it. You know, it wasn't anything substantial that people were handing. You know, and then to see, because like I said, you could see the Franciscans, but they weren't handing anything out. You know, I don't recall them handling anything out. I know a couple people were giving out rosaries, you know, but you get a rosary and you're like, well, what do I do with it? You know, and had I had something that gripped together with that to say like, oh, this is why it's important to have a rosary, you know, because that wasn't it was more of a tourist. All the pamphlets that I got were on tourism or, you know, or just certain events at that time. So I think it would have helped me where I was, to say like, this is what Fatima is, you know, and especially because you have this image that it just kind of reignites. This is what the beauty is.
Right.
Yeah.
So all things considered, would you say it would be impactful for the Fatima Center to be present at World Youth Day?
Yes, honestly. In my opinion, I think so. Because like I said, I was looking for consistency and discipline and something that could remain constant. You know, seeing the way that the world is now and how our young adults are built around social media, we've come to see a lot of them searching, like, why is there a target on the Latin Mass to have it removed from different dioceses, things like that. As someone who had so many people say this is what you need to do, this is where you need to go, and all of that, I always question, well, why is that wrong, or why is that bad, or, you know. So in terms of that, it would be to see the Fatima Center there, to see the Latin Mass, to be able to speak with someone who comes from that, or just get the invitation, to go and explore that option of what is a Latin Mass. I think a lot of the youth are looking for that. I know that, you know, sometimes you get a parent who's like, well, I'm not taking you there because I don't know anything about it. I'm not going to go. You know, but then when you're on your own and you have that area to explore, and someone says, hey, come to the Latin Mass, or here's what it's about, or this is what Our Lady of Fatima talks about, this is what the message is. You may not hear that in your own home. Like I said, it was something that I heard, but it wasn't something that was given to me in depth.
Right.
So it is nice if you were to meet someone and say, this is what Our Lady of Fatima talked about, this is what her message is, this is why it's important, this is what it can do for the church, to hear those things, you know. Even if you're someone who necessarily doesn't practice the faith, right? Or is someone who's just going like, oh, it's just a tourist event, you know, to see that, to be able to be approached. I remember when I was younger, one of the things that I was living with my mom and my grandma, and I remember I was like, I'm not going to church. But then it would bother me that I wasn't invited to church. So I don't know how that made sense in my mind, but it was like, I know that I'm not going to do this. But then when they would go without me and not even invite me, it was like, you're not even giving me an invitation to come. Like, and I feel like so many youth are left in that world right now. Like, they're in that space in their mind where you're not even inviting me. Like, you're not even giving me an option to go, you know? So that's kind of a hard place, because as humans, we're created that way. We wanna be invited. We want the camaraderie. Yeah, you know, we don't want to be alone.
A sense of belonging.
Right, exactly.
Because I mean, like we've talked about before in the past, you know, it's one of the reasons why some of the youth even go, you know, they join gangs, they join, you know, an extremely toxic group of people, because they feel belong there.
Right.
You know, they feel welcome there. You know, even though it may be, you know, the complete opposite of what their faith is, you know, it may lead them to destruction, but at least they feel welcome. You know? And in this case, you know, having someone from the Fatima Center present, you know, will have an impact, right? And so one of the cool things is that this year at the World Youth Day, you know, it's happening there in Lisbon, in Portugal.
Right.
You know, and if I recall correctly, I believe Fatima is just, you know, it's like a drive away. You know, I think like an hour, hour and a half, or something like that. And you know, the Fatima Center will also be there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it will also be handing out stuff. You know, and so, you know, they will be there. You know, well, they'll be all over.
Right.
You know, and so my last question to close this interview, as someone, you know, who grew up, you know, in our conversations that we've had, you know, and you and I have had this experience of, you know, certain people kind of trying to impose the faith on us, trying to, like, you know, as the expression is, you know, hit us over the head with the Bible.
Right.
You know, being indifferent to those who have a zeal, right? They're talking to us. They're trying to get us to, you know, take our faith serious, but we're indifferent, right? Now, what would be your advice to, let's say, a Fatima Center volunteer, you know, being there on the grounds, handing out things, and maybe being able to be an impact on someone's life, but they're indifferent? You know, what would you say would be a great approach to be, on any level, an impact?
I mean, I think that this, in particular, this World Youth Day, for the Fatima Center to be there, I think that it's actually quite on time, because what you're talking about is, like, I did feel that way. I felt like when there was people trying to force it on me, I didn't want to do it, right? Mm-hmm. But I wanted the invitation. And I think because you're so close to Fatima, maybe someone's never heard that message. And so when you say, this is what happened, do you know this miracle? It's not far from here. Mm-hmm. So you're inviting them, you're telling them about it, and then you're inviting them. And some people are going to go out of pure curiosity. I mean, when Fatima happened, look at how many atheists went, just because it was happening, mm-hmm. you know, because they heard about it. They didn't believe it. They didn't believe in anything. They didn't want anything to do with anything, but they were like, I got to go see this for myself, mm-hmm. you know? So it couldn't happen at a better time. Mm-hmm. For Fatima to go there. It couldn't happen at a better time that someone would be indifferent and that invitation would be open to them. So there's just so many ways that it would be impactful on the youth there at World Youth Day. I particular would be like, if someone told me, hey, you got to go see this, or this happened, did you know that Our Lady was here? Did you know that she appeared here? I would go. I'd be like, where is it? Let's try to make some type of arrangement that we can go and see it. Why? Because it's here. Mm-hmm. The time is now. It's present. We're in this moment. I may not ever come back to this part of the world. I've got to see it for myself. Mm-hmm. You know, so that's something that I think would be a huge impact, especially on someone who may be indifferent, because being present where she was present, you know, it changes you. Being present at adoration in front of Jesus in the tabernacle, it changes you. Mm-hmm. Knowing that it was there, it would happen, it's a true thing, that it makes it tangible. It makes faith tangible. And so it's nice, because if you were to send your child there, if your child was there, or if you're worried, you know, there's Our Lady is right there. She's present, and she's there. We know she's there. Mm-hmm. You know, so yeah, it's a big deal. Thanks for
all good points, all good things to consider. As you can see, we gotta let her go back to her domestic engineering. All right, say hi, Kalena. Say hi. No, okay. It's always great speaking to you. And thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this video, remember, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, that notification button to be notified for these and all our other videos here on the Fatima Center channel. Again, if you want to get any of our material for yourself, your friends, your family, visit shop.thefatimacenter.com. And to follow our World Youth Day series and mission in Lisbon, visit fatima.org/WYD 2023. And remember, only she can help us. If you mind closing a prayer?
Yes. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. I believe, I adore, I hope, and I love thee. I beg pardon for those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love thee. Our Lady of Fatima,
pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
God bless everyone. Say bye, Kalena.
Bye.